Welcome to Positive Recovery MD. If you're listening, chances are you want to create happiness around you and thrive in your life. We're glad you're here and you've come to the right place. This podcast will inspire and motivate you to not merely survive your recovery journey. We'll give you the tools to build or strengthen your foundation to thrive and flourish in your life. In each episode, we will come together as a community to have authentic conversations around addiction, recovery, and what matters, growth and progress, not perfection, all while developing positive habits for you to utilize. To learn more, please visit positiverecovery.com/podcasts to sign up and to receive the daily positive interventions that we'll review, as well as gain access to exclusive positive recovery content available only to Positive Recovery MD listeners. All right, let's get started.
Welcome to the Positive Recovery MD podcast, where we deep dive into the journey of recovery, personal growth, and transformation. And today, I'm honored to be joined by Grif Palmer, a seasoned professional in addiction recovery, a lifelong student of human sciences, and perhaps most importantly, someone with over 42 years of continuous sobriety. And Grif's journey is nothing short of remarkable. He has dedicated his life to helping others navigate sobriety, recovery, and personal development. From facilitating grief counseling and running sober retreats to studying trauma-informed care and polyvagal theory. Did I pronounce that right, Grif?
Yes.
Awesome. He brings a wealth of knowledge, experience, and wisdom to this conversation. So today, we're going to unpack the critical distinction between sobriety and recovery. Many people believe that simply stopping substance use is enough, but is that really the full picture? What does it take to move from just being sober to truly recovering and thriving? So Grif, welcome to the show, or welcome back to the show. I'm excited to dig into this conversation with you and to connect with you. For the listeners out there, when I first started at Positive Recovery, Grif was just starting at Positive Recovery. We were in two different roles, but worked hand in hand. And then our journeys took us different directions, and we're meeting again. So welcome, Grif.
Great to see you, Jamie. Really excited to be here, man. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. And I'm glad to have you here. And, talking about this topic, sobriety versus recovery, let's just go back to like the early days for you. So that's 2025, 2015, 2005. We're going back to what, 1990?
1983 is when this whole thing began. So
my daughter is in in junior high, where I was going to junior high back in 1983.
Okay, yeah, I went to Memorial Junior High. So
did you?
We won't revisit the Houston roots, but yeah, I was eating Damaris barbecue and James Coney Island and doing Memorial Junior High.
Let's go all the way back to 1983 and what that was like for you.
So I was a nightclub DJ at Confetti in Houston, really tearing it up, 28 years old. My Coke dealer told me he thought I was an alcoholic the same week my employer did. So I used to, get, let's just say, wildly inappropriate on the microphone with like 1,000 people in the nightclub when I had a lot of substance, mostly Jack Daniels mixed with other, whatever the bartenders would give me. My employer intervened on me. They called me in, kind of called me out for my behavior, showed me the employee manual where it says you're not supposed to drink at work, told me, I could either go to this treatment thing. There were no rehabs at the time, but Herman Hospital had a psych unit that, dealt with drug and alcohol addiction as well as mental health. So, like being any good alcoholic, the women were crying, the men were very stern, and, they kind of issued their ultimatum. And like any good alcoholic, I said, I need to think about it. So actually, my mom was really ill at the time. I had come back to Houston because my folks lived in Beaumont. So I kind of used the holidays. This happened on December 20th of 1982. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I used that holiday to kind of say, hey, let me go spend some time with my parents and think about it. And so it's funny, remembering going out with my college buddies over those holidays. they had already messed up my drinking, right? There was already this, is something wrong with me? It's like it just completely killed the carefree vibe. And one of the ladies who was key to me surrendering called me on I think it was New Year's Day and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I was about to pack up and go back to California where I had come from and take another geographical. And I just kind of ran out of gas. And I said, "Yeah, I guess I'll go." So checked into treatment on January 2nd. And, we were taken to AA meetings in the hospital that were at Herman. They were about half patients and half people from outside. Met my first sponsor and haven't had a drink since then. So it's very, very mysterious and miraculous. And I don't really take any credit for it. Obviously, I've done some work as prescribed in the recovery and AA literature, but it's been a really amazing journey. So,
wow. So when you went in, obviously you were going in to stop using drugs and alcohol.
No, I didn't know what they did on this ward. And I'm very lucky. I didn't know anything about alcoholism or Alcoholics Anonymous. We had some that ran through our family, but if you grow up in Houston, Texas, three things. You're going to fish and hunt, you're going to play football, and you're going to drink, right? So it was super cultural for me, right? I knew worse and worse consequences were happening. Things weren't going well at work. I had gotten 3 DUIs when I was DJing in Southern California, driving around late at night drunk. And, it was definitely going from fun to fun with problems to mostly problems. But I didn't understand any of that. And lucky for me, this really was a blessing. I had no idea that Alcoholics Anonymous was about abstinence. And so when I went to these first few meetings and started to figure out, they were talking about not drinking at all, not doing any drugs, not smoking any pot. There was no marijuana maintenance program. Jamie, I thought this was the worst idea I had ever heard in my life. But I just, I think if you have this disease or are affected by this disease, I knew somewhere deeper down that something was wrong. The way people looked at me when I drank, the way certain relationships had ended, I knew this wasn't headed in a great direction, but I loved it so much. It just never dawned on me you could not do it, right? It was my greatest love. And, it's like my life really revolved around it. So, yeah. So went to meetings, met my first sponsor, who was a great guy, Wayne G. Not too long after that, met your boss and my former boss, George Joseph. We were both running around the program then. And, I think this was a place where my weakness was a strength. I was always kind of a codependent people pleaser. I know that now. I didn't know that then. So, we had moved every 2 years because my dad was with Mobil Oil. So, I just wanted to be first in the class. So I sat in the front of the meetings, and when they said do something, I did it. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't understand most of it. I didn't know all the God stuff and the 12 steps and what these step things were. I thought it was some kind of penance for my drinking and, but when they said do it, I just kind of did it and actually pretty quickly. I got relief almost immediately. And the crazy part of it is I went back to the nightclub 3 weeks sober and was spinning records sober, which was crazy. Right? Like I probably wouldn't tell a sponsee to do that today, but it worked.
So this was 1983, right?
Yep.
I'm just going to spin off for a second. In 1983, I was in junior high. My parents would never let me go to the parties. And we were all of us, me and my 2 brothers, we fought it. Well, one of our friends' dad owned Confetti's. And they had a party there one night that they opened up to all of the kids.
Yep.
And the kids ended up breaking into the liquor cabinets, and they brought out 2 rolls of quarters and they lined them up and told everybody to call their parents and for their parents to come and pick them up. There's so many stories from that. That is so bizarre
That's wild. I might have been spinning records that night. So,
oh my goodness. It could have been 83. It could have been 84.
yeah.
No later than 84, because
Yeah.
85, I was in high school,
Yeah.
and 85, 86, 87,
That's
88.
wild.
Yeah. And then 89 was my first treatment center at Gulf Pines up in North Houston. So we might almost have the same amount of time if I would have just gotten it like you did.
We get it when we get it, right?
I read the steps and thought, oh my God, that is the most amazing way to live life. Like, I can't wait to go show my family, to show them how they should be living, with no thought about doing it myself, because I could see that that's the right way. I just, how do you go and change it? So just to kind of like bring it back, at what point did you realize like this is more than just removing the alcohol and the drugs, and that, I have my whole life in front of me, and this is such a so many growth opportunities?
So, I think historically I was super grateful, lucky, blessed, whatever you want to call it. John Bradshaw was in my Saturday AA meeting, Saturday mornings. So I was getting a lot of this ideas about this being a family disease, right? And, I went to Unity, which was a big pyramid in Houston, and Howard Caesar ran it. And so he was having Deepak and Marianne Williamson and Wayne Dyer, and all these kind of spiritual, not very Christian, my Christian friends thought I was, chasing the devil, but, there was just a lot of mind expansion people, we were around during that time. And so I think that combined with, Holy Name Retreat, which is an AA retreat at a Catholic passionate retreat center. It's not a Catholic retreat. It's non-denominational, but the AA guys from the 1950s, I think, were really good friends with these guys and ran this retreat that I went to once or twice a year, where you spent the whole weekend going from step 1 on Friday night through step 12 on Sunday. And so being around a lot of other sober alcoholics, some of them new like me, mid-termers, long-termers, old-timers, I just got kind of immersed in this experience. And, I've never missed, I'm kind of an AA historian by this point in my life. I've always been fascinated by Bill's journey and Bob's journey, and just kind of how this whole thing went down and how it survived. So, obviously the big book has all sorts of clues in there. It says we know only a little. So AA for me has not been the canon. I know the big book, but I don't thump it much, because it says in there, we had to get down to causes and conditions, right? So that's the simple version. So that's, and if you read Bill's writing, if you read the 12 and 12, which was written 18 years later, he gets a little more specific about instructions, especially steps 6 and 7, which are about character defects and this striving to always get better and not sitting, not resting on your laurels. And if you go all the way out to his last book, which we don't talk a lot about around the program I'm in, the community I'm in Florida, which is Language of the Heart. It's pretty much a plea. It's, Language of the Heart is mostly Grapevine articles from his last 10 years of living. And the famous emotional sobriety article is in there. But he just pleads with people that spiritual growth is where it's at. That's what this program is. I have at times unpopular opinion that time is kind of meaningless. I love chips and birthdays, in California, you get a cake and, there's nothing like celebrating the fact that you've not drank or drugged, because like the civilians don't understand it because they don't know how much we loved it. But, I've learned you can be really spiritually fit with just a little bit of time if you get busy doing the work. And unfortunately, you can be really, really sick with a lot of time away from alcohol and drugs,
Oh, wow.
And I've experienced both. So
you've experienced both, as in you've been both sides of that coin?
Yeah. I've been dry drunk in AA. I've gone through times when, life and ego took over and I forgot. And I'm lucky. I've always liked meetings and service work and sponsoring guys. And, we actually have a retreat this weekend. I took that same holy name retreat format and now we're starting it out here. We had our first one last year and people's minds were blown. So, so I've been close enough to the program most of the time to not slip and use again. But yeah, you can get pretty sick sober, which is the topic today, which is sobriety versus recovery. And, it didn't dawn on me until about 20 years sober when I went through a horrible divorce, most life-shattering event still to this day. I've been estranged from my 3 daughters for that 20 years, really don't have meaningful contact or contact I'd like with them. And so, it's this idea that without some kind of spiritual program, which Alcoholics Anonymous is, whatever your 12-step thing is, I wake up an untreated alcoholic every day. And no doubt, working the steps and not drinking does become habitual. I mean, it definitely gets easier. But, the way my brain is wired, a spiritual solution is usually the last thing I think of, not the first. And not everybody's wired that way. And that's why there's 12-step programs for alcohol and drugs and porn and sex and shopping and gambling. And, this 12-step solution, we're 90 years in now. It's been applied to anything that kind of is accompanied by obsessive thinking and behavior, right? Like that's the hallmark, of addiction and alcoholism, which is, you obsessively think and behave past the point of harm to yourself and others, and you're unable to stop it. I mean, Russell Brand's latest deal is being addicted to your technology, this little anxiety generator that we carry around with us, right? And it's like you see people, and it's like, that's okay, so we're in an interesting part. We won't go too deep with this, but, we're in a time with brain science where we really understand a lot more about the addict brain and what's going on up there. And, so it's not hard to see, obviously I feel kind of lucky that I was a drug addict and alcoholic because it was so obvious and the benefits were so immediate, when I quit. But, some of this stuff, if they're process addictions or addictions related to food and sex and money and things that you are going to interact with in life, they're a lot more subtle. They're tougher to deal with.
So yeah, and man, you said a lot from talking about the book and then the 12 and 12, because I was going to say something I remember about the big book and the 12 and 12 is that the shortest 2 steps they talk about in the book are step 6 and 7, but they're the longest 2 in the 12 and 12. And it's because that's where the 12 and 12 is really where the experience gets brought into the picture. The other one is just, the experience is in those first few chapters because we all know about the disease, but when it comes to working the steps. So tell me a little bit about an experience that you had and like what it's like to go from being in recovery to all of a sudden just being in sobriety. Like you don't even realize it. Like I know my divorce was a catalyst for me to where when I'm getting divorced with a 2.5-year-old daughter and an infant son, it's like, really, this is what sobriety's getting me. And that actually it is what sobriety gets you. But I wasn't doing the growth work. And it wasn't until after when I realized, holy cow, this is where the growth lies. Now, I was still involved in 12-step work, but I tripped into a yoga studio, which then started to have me see things different, which then translated back to what I had been doing in the rooms for all these years. So tell me a little bit about your experience with what it's like and I guess we have to get humble and.
Well, you can either learn humility by practice or getting humiliated, right? There's 2 paths to it. So yeah, I think it's very subtle, everybody has their own program, even though we're kind of working the same one. but I've always been a depth guy. I mean, part of my makeup that I've learned in recovery is I'm a seeker, and all of the churches and other spiritual traditions I've explored, from Buddhism to Course in Miracles to, you name it. My spiritual journey has been as unique as everybody's becomes, but it's always been about asking the question, and trying to stay in the question versus getting the answer. So, if I see my AA sobriety or recovery as a drug, like it's supposed to fix me, then, I may not have the full perspective, because a lot of people don't understand why when we go to AA meetings, we say, "Hi, my name's Grif. I'm an alcoholic." It's like, yeah, but you haven't had a drink in 42 years. Why do you still say that? And it's a reminder to me. It helps me be part of the tribe. It helps me identify with the newcomer, but it also reminds me that this is the endless journey. It is the story that never ends, right? It's like you just keep striving and reaching and growing. And, I think the best thing that ever was shared with me was my first sponsor explained the sobriety wheel to me. And he said, "Grif, here's the sobriety wheel. It's pain, growth, serenity, complacency, followed by pain, growth, serenity, complacency," right? And so he made this wheel, and he said, that's kind of what, they talk about peeling the onion, but that's the process you get sober with. So, it doesn't mean, that's just what happens. People plateau at certain levels of recovery or income or lifestyle. And, it's like, my recovery life is a big part of my life, but it's not my life. It supports my life. But times when, by the time we had my third daughter and I was a big software mucky muck in Silicon Valley, and had sold my business in Houston, and, life was as good as it gets materially, but as much of a blessing as all of that was, it also was a distraction to, me realizing where the source of that success had been. And it was spiritually had been gifted to me through following certain principles, as you sow, so shall you reap. And when you stop sowing, the reaping changes. And so I still made meetings when we moved to Austin and sold my business in Houston. And I made meetings when we moved to Silicon Valley in the first internet boom. So I was connected, but it was different than my original recovery community. And my focus was more on, material success. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's some of the promises of the program, or how good life can get. But keeping it in perspective, and, you used a word, keeping humility involved and realizing, what a gift that is can change very quickly. And it did for me through my first divorce. I'm not here to take our ex's inventory, but, I married into a family system that also had a lot of alcoholism and this disease in it. And, not everybody was in recovery in our family. I'm here telling my story today, but sometimes our journeys just take turns that we're not expecting at all. And I think the beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous for me is it was always a tribe I could go back to and get back to the principles. And I always kind of had this feeling that if I stay sober and practice these principles in my affairs, that things will right themselves. That if I'm using measurements of, my bank balance or my car or where I live or, who I'm married to, I got the wrong measuring sticks out, cause all those are beautiful, wonderful things that a lot of us get to experience. But, unfortunately for me, I call my ex my guru, cause she's taught me the most, like that's where I had to grow the most.
So let's go back to that time, because I
Yeah.
think just in case there's a listener on here or
Yeah.
somebody that's in a spot where they're realizing, they've got some sobriety behind them, they've got
Yeah.
some recovery behind them, but they've hit this space in their life, this time in their life where they're not connected to what got them there. Like, what were some of the things that you did that got you back on track?
Okay, great
Yeah.
question. That's a great question. And I think, first of all, there's a reason they say get a sobriety date, get a sponsor, and get a home group, because most of us don't recover in isolation. We recover in community, right? And so, community's a big hip word now, but, AA's been doing it for 90 years. And so, it doesn't mean every community is the same. I live in Jupiter, Florida. I mean, the South Florida recovery community here is amazing. I mean, it's just, very, very bubbly and active, and there's lots of stuff to do inside and outside of meetings. But, I think if people are stuck, I mean, the thing for me that, growing up around other programs, whether it was John Bradshaw in AA meetings or going to listen to his lectures at Palmer Church before he would go record them at PBS, I was around other programs. My first wife went to Al-Anon for about a year in support of me, so I attended Al-Anon. CODA, which is Codependence Anonymous, was popping up. ACA was popping up. Bradshaw was big into ACA. And as I hit some of my other brick walls in recovery, I've always been other program centric. So I gained about 5 pounds a year for the first 10 years of my sobriety. So I went to an OA meeting, right? And I didn't stay, but I attended for a few months and heard the message there and thought how I could apply that in my sober life. And I've probably, Jamie, by now been to every meeting with an A that there is at some point. Not always because I belong there specifically, but because I just see the world through a 12-step lens now. And so I knew, wow, if I'm stuck here, I should go listen to some other people struggling like me and see what their solution is. So, my big one, like this question about who's stuck, if you're an alcoholic that's never been to an Al-Anon meeting, go. It's very interesting to see the other side. My first divorce at 20 years sober, I moved to Los Angeles after that divorce, and there was a great recovery community there. And in LA, I attended a lot of double winter meetings. So double winter meetings they're around the country, but there's a lot more in Southern California. It's AA and Al-Anon in the same meeting. So there's an Al-Anon speaker for 7 minutes, an AA speaker for 7 minutes, and then everybody shares. So you find recovering couples. You find sometimes one person's in recovery and another one's not. You find a lot of people at exactly what you're talking about, 5, 10, 20 years sober that hit the wall. And it's like, I'm not drinking and I have all this time, but I'm freaking miserable. And it's one of the reasons why I think if you read that emotional sobriety article and all of Bill's later writings, the reason he's pleading with people to keep growing is because it was the first time they were watching people with 10 or 20 years blow their brains out or drink again or hang themselves. And I mean, we don't always talk about the sick and suffering with long-term sobriety in meetings, right? There was another great meeting in Los Angeles I went to called Life After 10, and anybody was welcome, but you could only share if you had 10 years or more. And a lot of these longer term struggles, which are not really sobriety struggles, they're life struggles. It's like, how do I keep growing through this? So my current passion, just to wrap up the question, is ACA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics. I had gone early in my program. There's a great community here. ACA is pretty much just causes and conditions, and they're a little deeper heart-based recovery meetings. There's a little more acknowledgement and coming out of denial about trauma. A lot of us have experienced, because obviously trauma isn't just for soldiers and emergency room doctors. It's a real thing. And, it's so funny. Like sometimes guys I sponsor, I'll say, well, come to an ACA meeting with me. And they're like, oh man, I don't want to work another program. It's like another program. And I always have to remind them, it's like, look, dude, there's only one program. It's called your program.
Yeah.
So whatever 12-step meetings or breath work or yoga or therapy you need to be going to work your program, then that's where you got to go and get the support you need. Because there's just all this beautiful, gentle, loving support in these programs that I think a lot of us, we just run by, I've got X amount of time and, the only real problem is the first drink. And, the big book doesn't say that. If you read the 10th step promises, which I love, most meetings read the 9th step promises. If you read the 10th step promises, they're pretty spectacular, right? And, they come at the 10th step because that's what being sober a long time is about. And it says a few things, we'll react sanely and normally. We'll see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without thought or effort on our part. That is the miracle art. And here's the crazy part. We are not fighting it. Neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. And then, of course, the killer line, this is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition, right? So once again, this pointer from Bill to dude, it's not about abstinence. It's about spiritual fitness. And yes, AA and NA work a lot better if you'll stop, right? They don't work while you're still using, but that isn't the point. I know you've seen the TED Talk where the guy's like, the opposite of sobriety, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. I'm not buying the whole pitch there, but to me, the opposite of addiction is sobriety and the gift of sobriety is connection, right?
Yeah, no, I'll go there with you because forgetting about the connection piece. What I do know is when I'm disconnecting, I'm facing back towards addiction.
Yep.
Not working on the growth unless I'm doing it for my own personal space intentionally.
Yep.
A lot of the times when I'm disconnecting because I'm just trying to escape. And, there was a line that you used about the first step. I was told once the only step you have to work perfectly is the first step. And I never got that until I realized, because you can do 2 through 12 and you don't have to do them perfectly as long as you keep doing them. But once you pick up that drink, it's all gone.
Yeah. And look, I don't question, I'm not, it's like I get the focus on not drinking early on because that's all you can probably do if you're new to recovery. So, whether it's, if your ass falls off, pick it up and come to a meeting, or take your desire chip and put it under your tongue. And when it melts, you can drink. I mean, there's all sorts of funny AA-isms that are really focused. And that's why a lot of meetings are focused on abstinence and sobriety, because we're helping newcomers get sober. But I think the point is, if you read the literature as written and study everything Bill wrote, it's pretty clear that it's a spiritually based solution, which is why it's been able to be applied across all these other amazing things and help so many millions of people. I mean, it's not 1939 anymore, right? It's like there's more than a couple hundred people sober. I mean, there's millions of people that have followed this path in their own kind of way and been very successful with it,
For sure. No, yeah, there's, it's when you have 10 years, sobriety isn't just enough. When you hit that roadblock, you have to dig in and do more work, and you have to continue to stay in some type of growth work. At least for me, that's my experience.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because my sponsor used to go nuts when people would call step 10, 11, and 12 the maintenance steps. He said, they're not the maintenance steps, they're the growth steps, right? Like this idea that we keep taking inventory, which means you've had a spiritual awakening and you don't fall asleep again, because a lot of us have spiritual awakenings and then go back to sleep, right? And it says, improve our conscious contact through prayer and meditation, not or, right? So there's a signpost there for where the action is. And, the 12 step, carried this message to other alcoholics, but I think we missed the main part of the 12 step because everybody, I sponsor guys, so I'm doing the 12 step. It says practice these principles in all our affairs, which is a very tall order, right? You can spend a lifetime doing that. And, thank God I'm perfectly imperfect and a work in progress. So I don't lose sleep over it, but I've learned when I'm uncomfortable, there's usually something I can do about it, right? And it's not change you. It's dawned on me that maybe, possibly, it might be me.
So let's talk about that. In some of the areas where you've looked and it was you, what are some of the practices outside of recovery that aren't like 12-step based or recovery based have you found not as a solution, but as an added resource for maintaining your personal sanity? Okay,
great question. And I think in my mind, it's all about recovery, for me, and it's all about that. But I'm old timey and respectful in that way. If I go to an AA meeting, I'm an alcoholic. If I go to an NA meeting, I'm an addict. I'm a deeply faithful Christian, but I don't really talk much about Jesus in meetings. I practice Buddhism, which confuses a lot of people. Buddhism is not a religion. Buddha didn't claim to be anything divine. He's just another guy that, found some ways to alleviate suffering. So Buddhist practice really was a lifesaver for me when that divorce happened and my life shattered. I picked up a book by Pema Chodron called When Things Fall Apart, which began my Buddhist studies. And it was the perfect book for a sober alcoholic who had hit the wall, right? I read a lot of Stoic literature. I'm kind of a Stoics guy. The Stoics are just Al-Anons from 2,000 years ago, right? Right? I mean, if you read a lot of Stoic literature, Marcus Aurelius and Cicero and all these guys, it's kind of Al-Anon and Buddhism, back in the Greek and Roman days. So it's a very practical application of living. These guys were senators and, generals and emperors and, there's a lot of wisdom there. Like I said, really going all the way to the beginning of my sobriety, I was lucky to be around, Bradshaw doing a series on the family, and I was involved in the men's movement, in Houston, which was kind of a big thing. So there was something called New Warrior, that I got to be a group facilitator with New Warriors. That was very frightening and very growth for me. Like you said, yoga and meditation kind of showed up for me at 20 years sober. I was always a good prayer. I could talk to God a lot, but I wasn't much on listening. And believe me, when your family life shatters, it gets real quiet, And so I found at the darkest depths of that despair and brokenness, is where I found something quite different and special and divine that assured me, it's kind of like, you read some stuff in the big book and, that time in my life through meditation and pain, you kind of have to decide, is love and tolerance really my code? Or is that just some bullshit in a book? And have I really ceased fighting anyone or anything? Really? And so those are big spiritual questions, AA doesn't call on you to answer them. Life calls on you to answer them. So at some point, most of us hit something. And, even with new guys, I always ask them, I said, let's make a list of reservations. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, what are your reservations? What would you what do you think you could not stay sober through? Whether it's the death of a parent, the death of a child, all those kinds of things. And, we've talked a lot about it. I mean, I'm a continuing education guy, so I've been around a lot of other, whether it's internal family systems or trauma training. I mean, but they all relate to recovery. Breath work is the latest thing, the last couple of years since I ended my career in entertainment technology. I'm lucky enough to teach breath work once a week up here in Jupiter. And I found breath work when I moved back to LA in 2017. A really good sober buddy of mine named John Paul Crimmy, who's kind of the big breath work guy on Instagram. John Paul's awesome. And I learned from him and Dan Brule, who's another great teacher. And, I didn't want to do breath work. It's like, that's way too woo-woo for me. But John Paul was this personal trainer to the stars. He's from Boston, so he drops an F-bomb like every third word, right? And it's like he's teaching breath work, right? Like at this church in Santa Monica. So I went and did the particular style that he teaches and that I teach now. And it was mind-blowing, right? It was just life-changing, and it's this whole idea that, your breath is kind of this thing you carry around. If you get into yoga or meditation, you start learning to practice with your breath, and the only reason you use your breath in meditation is because it's always there, right? It's something that's easy to focus your attention on. But I teach circular conscious breathing, which is really big open mouth breath, right? For 15 to 30, 40 minutes. And the reason I love it, the reason I had such a great experience when I did it with John Paul was that particular style of breath work. And it's not hyperventilation, so you don't hyperventilate. It actually turns off the prefrontal cortex, right? Which is your monkey mind, right? That's where the constant chatter keeps you from actually noticing what you're feeling. And so, I've learned through teaching breath work, we're not made to be storage containers. Humans are wired to experience their environment, have emotions and feelings and experiences while it's going on, and then move on to the next experience. But most of us aren't raised like that. We store away a lot of pain and a lot of hurt and a lot of stuff that just kind of you get stuck. Even if you're sober or even if you're Christian or even if you do yoga, and I mean, it's so much fun. The class I teach is with a friend, Jessica Hoff, who is a sound healer. So we do about 30 minutes of breath work, and then we do a little heart opening meditation in the middle. And then she does sound healing with chakra bowls, which again was a little woo woo for me. But it's this amazing thing. So the breath work kind of shakes it all up, and then the sound healing. And I mean, Jamie, every week somebody comes up to us at the end and goes, "What just happened to me? I've been doing therapy for 10 years. Where did that come from?" Right? And we always tell them, it's like, it's not us. It's like, that's what you're carrying. And you can use things like the breath to alter your state and change your mind so you get access to it easier, right? Because as you know, breath work's gotten it's ultra hip now, but it's thousands of years old, guys. They knew it back then. There's pranayama in yoga. There's Wim Hof, there's everybody's branding it so they can sell it on Instagram, but it's an amazing practice. I mean, even box breathing is the easiest way. Somebody that's suffering from anxiety can basically change their entire state in about 5 minutes.
Yeah. No, breath work's amazing. I've done the breath work where it's almost 3 hours long, and it's like an out of body experience. It's kind of surreal. I've done one that was shortened into an hour long. I think it's important to be able to, hold space with someone to process that afterwards.
Correct.
Yeah. But I just find that a lot of these channels, I love the breath because it was, in my journey through yoga and my search for expansive growth from it and learning about the power of now, where I realized that our breath only takes place in one place. ever, and that's right now. So if you're putting all of your attention on your breath right now,
You are present.
you're present and you're not thinking. And the minute you think, you're no longer on your breath. And
Yeah,
it's this
and
practice.
you know, breath is underrated. If your listeners want to read or listen to an amazing audiobook, it's actually called Breath. I'll pull up the author, but it's a yellow book.
Oh yeah. Tom
And-
Dotson.
yeah.
Our last podcast was Tom Dotson. I forgot to tell you about that book, but he gifted me that book.
It's
And there's several
amazing.
different practices.
It's amazing. And, you know, the simple version, you know, it really gets deeper, not only into breath practices, but the science of breath. And, you know, people don't understand this idea, this Sanskrit ancient idea of prana, you know, which is in the breath, but it's not just oxygen, right? It's life force or vital energy, you know, that's in every breath. And what you learn and the science that now backs it all up is, you know, breath can change a lot of different mental states, physical states, and even your nose. You know, humans are nose breathers. So other than the breath work I teach, you're not supposed to breathe through your mouth, right? You're supposed to close your mouth. And that's because your nose is not just a couple of holes in your skull where the air goes in. It's actually an organ, right, that does things with the prana, the oxygen, and the other things in the oxygen, and it changes everything. It changes your emotional state, your mental state, you know, your physical state. And I mean, so it's really an interesting practice, to, like you said, and I think if yoga is a thousands of year old practice, I mean, the purpose of yoga was to prepare you to meditate, right? And, you know, my one instructor here says, you know, if you're not breathing properly during yoga, you're just doing calisthenics. Right. And
You're
so
defeating the practice.
this whole idea of using the breath as this, you know, it's like, well, people, I can't meditate because my mind won't shut up. And it's like, nobody's told them the purpose of meditation is not to quiet your mind, right? Like my buddy, Eric Hauerbusch, that was remember he was on the podcast a few years ago. He said, you know, if you ever quiet your mind, either call your sponsor or dial 911, right? That's because human minds aren't quiet, right? And it's like, you know, meditation's about awareness and being in that moment you're talking about. And the breath for most people is the easiest way you can bring your attention into the moment.
Yes. And like another piece of that is that most people, they kind of think differently about the breath work because they breathe all day long. But when you think about it, very little of your breathing is intentional breath. It's just breathing. It's your body just doing what your body knows to do, and it regulates your breath for you. But when you actually focus on your breath and breathe intentionally, you're being intentional with purpose. And when you're doing that and connecting with your body and listening to your body or your mind, so many remarkable things happen, which is what I found. It was truly 2.5 years into practice before one of my teachers, Farida, and the way that she taught the practice, because a lot of vinyasa flows, they speed it up really fast to get you out of your breath. And she would teach a very intentional flow. And it clicked with me one day with her when she kept speaking to allowing the breath to build the pose. So it's like a unison of the pose, of the expansion, of the contraction with the breath, not losing your breath and trying to catch up with everybody else and be like everybody else. That's the opposite of what the practice is.
Correct. And you know, what you learn through breath work is maybe a gateway is there's a lot of autonomic nervous systems that we have that with the human mind, you can take them over. Like how many people remember their first breath? Most people don't. They were probably spanked on the butt or shaken, you know, but breathing is something you're going to do, you know, from your first breath to your last breath. And the question is, if you bring that autonomic thing, so you can't control your heartbeat, you can control your breath rate, you can control your mind, right? It takes practice, but you know, people don't realize there's a reason they could bury these yogis underground for 3 days in a coffin And when they dug them up, they were alive, right? And those are conscious autonomic control of things that the average person walking down the street thinks, oh, I can't control that. It's like, yeah, you actually can, And to me, I mean, really, the greatest gift in recovery and sobriety is that you're given back the ability to choose, what you want to do with your life, your body, your mind, all of that in sobriety, because it's pretty hard to do it if you're stoned and drunk.
Yeah. And then you get to go and give it back, which is what it sounds like you're doing in many different ways, whether it be breath work or step work or retreats, creating retreats, which you got one this weekend, right?
Yeah. It's our second time we've done that men's retreat format, which is, Friday night, step 1 through Sunday morning. We go through all 12 steps. But yeah, my life's beautiful right now. I mean, I am a beach bum bodhisattva, right? I live about a 5-minute walk from the beach with a couple of crazy pooches who are over here probably getting restless. And, bodhisattvas are just people that try to alleviate suffering. So, I'm lucky that pretty much everything I do for, work, that doesn't feel like work is related to that. And if it's not related to that, I'm at a fortunate place in my life and blessed place that I don't really have to do it, So, it's another gift of sobriety that started by not taking the first drink, right?
Yeah. A good way to kind of wrap this up is something that I thought about in the middle when you were talking about, there was something you were talking about where you were speaking to the message and that all the group's messages are different. And it's funny because I've said this quite a few times recently, but I was perplexed when I noticed one of the traditions is that each group ought to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers, not the message. And I was like, what? Why wouldn't all the groups carry the same message? And what I realized was the message really is the experience that people have through doing the work. And because we all have different experiences, like we all have something different to share that's aligned, but we may not resonate with a certain group's message. And so, you have to go and try to find a different group, which is why they say, go to a meeting. If you didn't like that one, find another one, another one. Anything you want to share in your story? Because you've seemed to have found several groups that you really, really, really resonated with. Did you have some that you went to and it just didn't resonate?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's pretty common, right? Because we're human, and as much as you say principles before personalities, there's a lot of personalities in the rooms of recovery. Thank God, right? Because we're all having our own experience. But yeah, I mean, I think your mention of that tradition's fascinating because it's just another little edgy way that Bill and Bob figured out how to decentralize Alcoholics Anonymous. If it would have said the message, then we would have been arguing for the last 90 years about what the message is, right? And in the end, as much as I can read you stuff out of the big book, which I did on today's podcast, and because it resonates, all you really have to share is your experience, your strength, and your hope, right? And a lot of people find a ton of that in the literature. I love the literature, but it's like this idea that you can keep looking. But, it's also, my first sponsor said a couple of very wise things. He said, the only thing missing from any meeting you go to is what you're not bringing to it. So, this idea of looking for them to fix me or, like me or think like me, that is more turning recovery into a drug. Like this drug's going to somehow magically fix me if I just resonate close enough. So, I think some meetings just resonate. I mean, my home group is a 7 p.m. newcomers meeting at the Oasis Club here. And, the reason it resonates so deeply with me, one is there's a bunch of people I love and tons of rehab vans every Monday night. And we get to love on some newcomers who probably don't even want to be loved on, but it's energy. And it's like, if the God stuff's confusing or the spiritual solution stuff's confusing, in the end, it's just energy. Like, go to meetings where you feel a good energy, I mean, ACA meetings for me have this really heart-centered energy in them. And some people come and it scares the shit out of them. It's like, can we just go back to a meeting where they talk about not drinking? I don't want to look at some of this stuff. And everybody's ready when they're ready. But I'll share you my newcomer mantra, which is really just a sober mantra, right? And the mantra, and I say this at least 1,000 times a day because I use it in my breath work in the mornings. I don't know. I need help. I might be wrong, right? And you just say, try.
I got to get my pen.
You try repeating that about, try it 100 times a day. Just meditate on, I don't know. I need help. I might be wrong, and what it does, it just opens you up to all the new information, help, love, generosity that can be coming in, because so much of us, I think, recovery and religion, the reason it can become toxic at times is because everybody keeps looking for certainty, right? They want certainty. If I just do that, I'll get this. If I just believe this from this guy, I'll get this. And it's like spirituality's never been about certainty. It's been about mystery, since the beginning of time. The Christian mystics said, the minute you say the word God, you've already missed the point, because there's no way to describe God. So that quote in the big book that says God is either everything or he's nothing, that to me is the most expansive way I can think about it. But it's like staying open is the purpose. Yes, staying sober is definitely one of the things you want to do, but from staying sober, you try to become open, right? Whether it's opening your heart, opening your mind. Sometimes we open our wallets, it's like you try to be more open, because the more open you are, the more you receive. Like my first meditation teacher at that 20-year horrible time taught me to meditate with my palms open and pointed up. And he said that was the posture that I would let things go and also be able to receive the new, right?
Yes.
If my fists are closed or my hands are turned down, he said, turn them up. And it's fascinating. It's kind of like kneeling in prayer. It's just the physical posture can change the way we think and feel. And even it took until yoga, because I started doing yoga about 10 years ago. And I'll just tell everybody listening, the biggest thing I had to overcome to begin yoga 10 years ago was how stupid I looked doing it. Okay. And I got over that self part. And it's an amazing, I practice a couple times a week now, and it's like this idea of opening up to new things and new experiences is just, to me, that's what recovery is. You're recovering the real you, that we're all children of God that deserve love and respect. And, some of us have just gotten beaten off the path, but the path's always there if you just come back to it.
Yeah. You're just kind of returning to who you are.
Correct.
Which we changed years ago.
I do group facilitation at a couple rehabs here during the week. And, I usually take a poll with the guys. It's like, how many people here are here and they want to get sober? And, not all the hands go up all the time. And I encourage them to be honest. It's like, hey, if you're just here getting away from the judge or the ex-wife, that's fine. And then I ask them, how many people think they know everything they need to know to get and stay sober? And a few less hands go up. And then the real difficult question for a lot of people that you really can dive into is, do I think I deserve to be sober? Because if you don't think there's something really, really beautiful underneath all this, it's really hard to keep doing this work, right? At some point, you have to come to terms with, there's a pony in that pile, right? And it's a beautiful pony, man. And it's like, that's why I'm doing this, is to return to my divine nature, whatever your God self, whatever you want to call it. Bill's got, 20 different ways he describes it, but it's really, it takes having that belief that there's something really beautiful inside. And that's what we're going. It's like, the Eastern guys say, hey, no mud, no lotus, and so this idea that there's something really beautiful to uncover. And that's still, I think I heard that my first year in recovery, and it's still my favorite. When somebody says, what is AA or what is recovery? It's uncover, discover, discard. There's nothing to get. there's only things to get rid of, which is my bad thinking, bad behaviors, bad emotions. I'm trying to lose that stuff. And if I work on get rid of it, then there's what's left behind is already beautiful. Doesn't take any work.
Man, we're going to come back for a part 2. I want to go down that deep road where we talk about the new studies, the science of the mind, and
it is an amazing time to be alive because all the science is lining up with thousands of years of spiritual tradition. It's like, oops, these guys were right. And it's beautiful. It's amazing, right?
And it still takes a level of intentional action in order to access it.
Yeah.
Right. There's still a human element involved in it. And if you can tap into it, man,
it's unlimited. Yeah.
And it's energy.
Yeah.
And I believe in energy. And I want to thank you because I believe I needed this conversation today more than you'll ever know.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah. This was great. Grif Palmer.
Jamie, so good to reconnect, man. Hope your listeners enjoyed some of it, and give George and Julie and Dr. Powers a big hug for me, man. They're part of the people that encourage me to carry on down the road, and you are too. So miss you guys. Love you guys. I hope you have a great evening, man.
And we're coming to visit because I'm going to do one of those breathwork classes. I told you, and I'm still committed.
Yeah, I got the Buddha beach pad right here. It's got a second bedroom. You can come stay at the beach with the dogs, and we'll do breathwork.
Awesome. Signing out. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Great to see you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Positive Recovery MD. Don't forget to visit positiverecovery.com/podcast to sign up to get your daily positive interventions sent straight to your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to Positive Recovery MD on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts to receive an automatic download when a new episode drops. And as always, if you or someone you know needs help, visit positiverecovery.com or call 877-4-SOBRIETY. That's 877-476-2743. Our why is simple. We care. We are here to help.